Good day, everyone! This is James Anthony J. Baybay, taking up Bachelor of Science in Criminology in Negros Oriental State University. For today's video, I will have the discussion of some of the person that gives contribution to make an institutions effective during ancient and medieval times. Maybe we don't know that some of our ancestors are part of the contributors, so it is also very important to study our past events in our history, because from our history we are able to live today because we build our thoughts and ideas from them. It is very important to know or gather information about the important events in our history to still preserve and discuss this to our fellow human or human person that is still existing to this new generation, or for this what they call millennial generations. And now let us know and discover this particular person who have produced big contributions to the history of our different institutions. So first, we will know this picture as the King Henry VIII. So we will also know of what he have been contributed to our history institutions. So Henry VIII was the King of England from 1509 to 1547. He broke with the Roman Catholic Church and had Parliament declare him supreme head of Church of England, starting the English Reformation because of the Pope would not annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon. He wanted to remarry and produce a male heir. During his 37 years reign, Henry married 6 wives, executed thousands for treason, and radically overhauled English religion, parliamentary powers, and the Royal Navy. He even transformed the postal service. So, Pope or King Henry VIII could probably have or the heir of having a son, because in order to pass his legacy of being a king, and also maybe it is only his own way to have this married 6 wives in order to have many heirs to him to pass for his, if he will pass away, so he could pass this to his sons. That's his wife. He had to marry these many wives. And in England's King Henry VIII is best known for 2 things: his many wives and his decision to execute several of them. So as we can see, this particular king is very abused of his power because he execute women and were without no reason, probably only for his fun, and his decision to suppress the Roman Catholic Church because the possible reason it is because he wanted to remarry and have many wives. So his decision to this Roman Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England as the official religion of the nation. This act became known as the English Reformation. He was in fact one of the most cultured and sophisticated monarchs ever to sit on the throne. So King Henry VIII was also emphasized of his being most cultured or lover of sophisticated monarchs in having his throne during his time. So, his enthusiastic patronage of the arts in England and serious passion for music, painting, and poetry helped drag our country into a new age of creativity. So during the era of King Henry VIII, also the producing or the existence of this painting, music, or poetry, or we can say arts, is very effective to have a society with its creativity. So we can see that during this era, we all discover and know the different kinds of arts, maybe how it could be worked uniquely by a particular artist during his era. So we should also know and discover of his possible and contributions in the field of corrections. So fighting for his role in Reformation when his desire for marital annulment led to the recreation of the Church of England. So Henry VIII is nonetheless most remembered for his succession of wives, Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. So we can say that King Henry is very influential during his throne because he could marry many wives or many women and have its reformation or changes for the Church of England just to follow him and make his demands for his own needs. So it is very crucial those days that this king is having or implementing a very abusive throne or management to his fellow men. Simply but he did not like having to yield his royal authority to the Vatican in matters concerning how he maintained the religious institutions of his own kingdom. But despite of his being abusive king, he always emphasized and influenced others the importance of having the religious institutions during or having in his kingdom that could possibly make a person or having its reformation effective way to know the spirituality growth by itself from the human person. So how he made changes to the church. So King Henry also made changes for the church, and it is because he is a king, so he can do whatever he wanted, and that is very influencing during the time of this King Henry VIII. And after splitting from the Catholic Church in 1533, King Henry seized the property of the Catholic institutions in his realm. He instituted his own church hierarchy with the Archbishop of Canterbury as the top bishop in the kingdom. So he produced his own officials and own people and made this at the top in the kingdom because he is very influential during his throne. So even though the Church of England did not differ much in its beliefs from the Catholic Church, Henry VIII did not make some changes. So this had too much to do with the influence of other Protestant reformers in Europe at that time. So because of the some Protestants influencer give advices to King Henry VIII that he could not possibly make changes for his kingdom. So this Henry eliminated 5 the 7 Catholic sacraments, leaving just the sacraments of baptism and Eucharist. So this King Henry VIII did not just make changes to the church. So this king has very many contributions during his throne, and this made this person very popular even today because of his accomplishments, even if that some of it is very negative, especially in having execution for his wives and having this kind of annulment. So, but still, this King Henry VIII still contributed a lot for his kingdom during his throne. So the King Henry broke away from the Catholic Church and founded the Church of England, also known as the Anglican Church. In this way, he was the leader of the English Reformation. Then, unlike other Protestant reformers, Henry did not have serious disagreements with the Catholics in terms of dogma and teachings. His issues were of personal and political nature. So King Henry VIII not only focuses to himself or benefit of himself, but the benefit of all the people that surrounds him, that under his throne and during his kingdom. So Henry also placed more importance on justification by faith for salvation, like the Lutherans, Anglicans simply had to have faith in God and repent their sins to receive salvation. This was a sharp departure from Catholic teachings, which say that good works are also required. He wanted to divorce his wife, Catherine of Aragon, because Henry VIII was very influential and she bore him no male heir, and the Pope wouldn't let him. Henry VIII divorced her because she didn't have sons. So King Henry VIII is not actually a lucky king because even if he marries many women, he could not produce a son or a boy. And that is why this kind of annulment and execution was present during his throne, because he wanted or dreamed to have a son in order for his heir to continue until today. But unluckily, that king did not produce any son, and in order for him to possibly make sons, he will marry many women. And it is sad to say that in that way he produced or making with another women in a harassed way. So it is not good because it could hurt women. And also, in the other hand, we will talk to another person who have contributed also during the time of the administration and contribution to the institutional correction. This is also a king and known as the King Edward VI. So as you can see to the picture, he looks so very young. This is a jewel of a King Henry VIII. So Edward VI from 1537 to 1553 was King of England and Ireland from 1547 to 1533. His short reign witnessed the introduction of the English prayer book and the 42 articles, and thus this period was important in the development of English Protestantism. So Edward's reign was marked by economic problems and social unrest that in 1549 erupted into riot and rebellion. So during the throne of King Edward VI also experienced harassment and rebellion to his kingdom. So maybe there are the people of his kingdom have conflicts and that made or caused into riot and rebellion. An expensive war with Scotland, at first successful, ended with military withdrawal from Scotland and Boulogne-sur-Mer in exchange for peace. So during this time of King Edward VI, it is always having this kind of wars because of they wanted to get this throne, or in order for them to be influential, they have to go to another countries and conduct a war in order for them to have more influential for themselves. But in this matter, they have exchanged for peace. So the transformation of the Church of England into recognizably Protestant body also occurred under Edward, who took great interest in religious matters. Although his father, Henry VIII, had severed the link between the Church and Rome. So, as King Henry VIII marrying many women, he luckily produced this man or son that could make his heir to make it continuous for the future, and this is King Edward VI. So it is very lucky for him to King Henry VIII, and also he had severed the link between the Church and Rome. So Henry VIII had never permitted the reinstitution of Catholic doctrine or ceremony. It was during Edward's reign that Protestantism was established for the first time in England. So with reforms that included the abolition of clerical celibacy and the Mass and the imposition of compulsory services in English. So although Edward VI's practical influence on government was limited, his intense in Protestantism made a reforming administration obligatory. His succession was managed by the reforming faction, so who continued in power throughout his reign. The man Edward trusted most, Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, that introduces a series of religious reforms. So during this time of era, they are more particular in reformation or changes or giving improvements by their kingdoms in order for them to be an effective leader from their kingdom. And also introduce this Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, introduced a series of religious reforms that revolutionized the English Church from one that, while rejecting papal supremacy, remained essentially Catholic to one that was intentionally Protestant. So, on the other hand, the confiscation of church property that had begun under King Henry VIII resumed under Edward, his son, King Edward VI, notably with the dissolution of the chantries, to the great monetary advantage of the crown and the new owners of the seized property. So we can see that this following royalty family has passed their thrones, especially if you have son or you will have this kind of heir. So, church reform was therefore as much a political as a religious policy under the King Edward VI. By the end of his reign, the church had been financially ruined, with much of the property of the bishops transferred into lay hands. So after the reign of King Henry VI, his kingdoms or all the people that surrounds him or under him was ruined, and the property was transmitted or converted into the lay hands. So let us now proceed to the life and contribution of King Edward VI, or how he can produce and provide contribution during his leadership to his country. And first is the Protectorate of Somerset. So this particular Protectorate of Somerset is the Parliament had empowered Henry VIII to determine succession to the crown accordingly by his will. Left the crown to his only son, Edward, and in the event of Edward's having no heir, to marry his daughter through Catherine and Elizabeth, his daughter through Anne Boleyn. If neither Mary nor Elizabeth would have heirs, the crown was to pass to the descendants of Henry's youngest sister, Mary. So, Duchess of Suffolk, such was the will of Henry. So, King Henry passed his throne to his younger sister, and that is Mary. So, in this situation, during the time of this royalty people, they have to pass their throne to the person that is only related to them, because it is important to preserve and maintain your legacy or royalty, being a royalty family during this time. Because if you have this kind of power, you will live like a king, that you can do whatever you want and implement rules that you wanted for the people and for the under of yours. So he showed also the enough moderation after his victory, in the hope that the Scots might relent moderation after his history, in the hope that the Scots might relent and agree to come to a settlement. But the Scots were determined not to solemnize the marriage. On the contrary, they shipped their young queen off to France, where she was betrothed to the Dauphin. It is very important to know these particular activities or events in our history, in order for us to have the idea of what were happening during or the time that we are not yet born. So, Edward VI was not quite 10 years old when he came upon the throne. So, at that very young age, Edward VI have also become a king. And it is very amazing to hear. And he was a sickly, precocious boy who by ability was questioned by physicians from the moment of his birth. In his will, Henry provided for a council of regency during his son's minority and named the person who would form the council. So the King Henry, after the birth of his son, named the council that could guide or see the growth of his son, King Edward VI. So it is also necessary during this era to have this kind of counselors in order to provide and may effective way of guidance to the son of a king. Then, this matter also of this situation. But on his death, Henry's will was disobeyed, and Lord Hertford, Edward's uncle, assumed the title of protector and was shortly afterwards created Duke of Somerset. So, after the death of King Henry VIII, the uncle of King Edward VI, created is the Duke of Somerset, this Lord Hertford, because he assumed the title of protector. Then this had upset the policy of maintaining good relationships with Scotland and bringing the union of Scottish throne with that of England. So this Somerset's impatience and his appeal to arms to force the Scots to accept the proposal of marriage without further delay defeated its own purpose. We can say that in this particular situation, some of the leaders are being selfish because they only wanted for their throne or the power without thinking from the sake of others. So the immediate concern of Duke of Somerset was to unite England and Scotland. So through the marriage of two young monarchs, so this is namely King Edward VI and Mary Queen of Scots. So there, yes, it is true that during those times, this is one way of having peace country or having this kind of agreement in marrying the son and daughter of every kingdoms. So the proposal of this marriage was first made by King Henry VIII as early as 1543 and consented to by the Scottish Parliament. Somerset sought to complete the bargain and thereby to put an end to the age-long hostility between England and Scotland. So he tried persuasion first but it failed. He then resorted to force. In his impatience, he invaded Scotland with some Italian troops in assistance and won a fruitless victory at Pinkie Cleugh in 1547. So this particular person conducted an invaded or created a war in order to get this throne with the assistance of the Italian groups and luckily win this war. And next, several bills were passed to promote and enlarge the Reformation. So the treason and heresy laws, including the 6 Articles of our late king, were repealed. So the Statute de Heretico Converendo, under which the Lollards and other who had been put to death for heresy since the days of Henry IV was repealed. So the communion of both kinds for the laity and the clergy was introduced. Then the bishops were, however, to be nominated by the king, and the process in the ecclesiastical courts was to run in the king's name. So the Somerset's invasion of Scotland united all parties against him in Scotland and brought the France and Scotland closer. So his Scottish policy thus proved a total failure. On his return from the north, Somerset summoned his first parliament. There were religious difficulties which they aimed at removing. He adopted reform views about religion, and it soon became evident that the reformers headed by Somerset intended to forsake the religious policy and position of Henry VIII. And Next is the session in 1549. So the uniformity of public worship was established and all ministers of the church were enjoined to use only the Book of Common Prayer prepared by the primate. This is usually called the first prayer book of Edward VI in 1549. So we can say that during the Somerset situation, there have many conflicts because of just having these thrones in order to gain this, because to obtain a powerful throne and kingdom. So it made many conflicts during this era as to how they could possibly pass their throne from the related to the family. And now, let us proceed to the second contribution of King Edward VI. So King Edward VI have this the Duke of Northumberland, Earl of Warwick. The position of Somerset brought Duke of Northumberland to power, and although he was invested with no power as that of protector or governor of the king, he was now the directing authority of the realm. He had removed Somerset, his great rival, from power. So this was the prayer book in English and one of the greatest treasures in English language. The uniform enforcement of the English prayer book was secured by the first Act of Uniformity passed in the same year. So he also summoned a parliament from which he expected the accustomed subservience. The House of Lords passed a very stringent law of treason, but the Commons modified many of its clauses and enacted that no person should be arraigned or convicted of treason except by testimony of 2 witnesses. So in order for you to become an offender, you should be presented by 2 witnesses in order for you to be prosecuted or have for treason. And then this shows that a spirit of justice was growing up in the minds of the representatives of the people. Then the parliament showed that it was no mere registering body of the executive decrees, and as such it was dissolved in 1552. And then, in character of Northumberland, son of Henry VII, unpopular minister, Dudley was self-seeking and unscrupulous and as lacking in principle as Thomas Cromwell. So at the first, Northumberland showed some leniency to Somerset, whom he set free and readmitted to the council. And then he now prepared to launch out on a vigorous policy of so-called religious reforms. And meanwhile, let us also see and witness this Northumberland also obtained most lavish grant of estates from the crown and was proceeding in a career of high-handed despotism. So he cared little for religion, but allied himself with the advanced reformers out of personal motives. And then also we could see that the commissions were issued for the seizure of all the remaining plates and ornaments of the churches, and the proceeds were supposed to have been used for building schools and relieving the poor. And then, some old schools were refounded and were known as King Edward VI Grammar and Schools. And then also the King Edward VI himself was sincere reformer and was eager to advance the new religion. Then Northumberland found this to be a means to maintain his hold upon his royal master in 1552. So he issued a second prayer book and forced it on the people. And then it was largely different from the first prayer book. And then for it was thrown up under the influence of German Protestantism. And in it, the communion was not called the Mass. And then the Northumberland was not a Protestant by conviction, but he launched upon an extreme policy of religious reform. Then, partly to please the Protestants and partly for money. In the meantime, in January 1552, he got rid of Somerset when he found that whose resented the Northumberland's policy were gathering around the fallen minister, who he got arrested on the charge of treason and executed. So if you really understand or know, you will be able to understand of the past events of the past kings, this following kings. But it only shows of many conflicts and complications about their kingdoms, because they always produce or make conflicts and will resulted for a war. And most of this, one of the reasons why do these things is present during this era, because most of the kingdoms and royalty family of these days are very hesitant to get the throne or to have this throne, because having a throne or kingdom from the past years is you can be a powerful person, because you could provide and implement many things by your own will. So that is very also interesting to discover. And that is why it is important for us, especially to the millennials, to read books and to search or use the social media in studying and knowing the past events happened from our history. And all the events that, if we can discover some events in the past years, we can probably or put within ourselves a lesson and knowledge about these particular events, because it is very important to have ideas and knowledge from our ancestors, because they know more than us, because they live from the very old times and know and also discover new things for the betterment of each of our state or country. That is why each of the country in the world have its different institutions or way of leadership, because some countries have their own kings and they don't have presidents, and also have prime ministers and also have their queens. So it is very interesting in knowing of what places or what country do this kind of leadership is existing nowadays. And for those countries that are still in this kind of living or way is a challenge or very amazing to hear, because as today they are still adopting this kind of process, and having a king in your country or queen, it is very not popular, especially to us here in the Philippines, because we only have our presidents. But despite of that president, we also have its secretaries that give guidance and advices to the president, and also help in the governments and governance in the country, and how to lead and provide an effective way of leading a country under his jurisdiction. Lastly, of the contribution of King Edward VI is mentioned as the doctrinal change during Edward VI's reign. So in this statement, we could say that the leadership of King Edward VI have also its changes and have to be improved in order to have the people inside that kingdom or belong to that particular kingdom experience another way of leadership and another way of ruling the kingdom or country. So this Edward VI minority and the regency under Edward Seymour, Earl of Hertford, later created Duke of Somerset, and John Dudley, Earl of Warwick, created Duke of Northumberland, constituted a landmark in the progress of the Reformation in England. So particularly in the country of England, there are many kings that and leadership, and mention many person that is included during their era on having this leadership, and it is very interesting to know. But still, we will not focus only for them, because we should also focus from the history of our country. That is why even if we are still or we are in the college, we are still taking up history subjects in order for us to have refreshments and to know the importance of knowing the contributors, especially to the person or Filipino ancestors that produced and give contributions for the development of our country, Philippines. So it is very good way to have this study of history. And this country, England, I would rather make this like the movie of the Game of Thrones, because just like the movie Game of Thrones, they are having conflicts from their royal family in order or for whom to be the crown. In order for that to be get, they have to win a war, and that is very interesting to discover on how that particular person get that crown and how to do that by winning that crown. So by the end of the reign of Henry VIII, the Protestants had grown stronger, and their strength lay in the towns on the southern and eastern coast and among the industrious classes of the society. The following statements that I have mentioned is only an additional information or background about what happened in the past or what kind of institution they have implemented during this era. And it is still very important to know this kind of thoughts and ideas. But it was still doubtful whether the majority had changed sides by the end of Henry's reign. So when Edward VI's accession and the Protectorate of Somerset, the government became almost entirely Protestant and proceeded to the object of completing the religious revolution of establishing a church not only independent of Rome but dissenting from many doctrines which had been for ages held sacred by the Catholic Church. So then, Henry VIII had established Catholicism minus the Pope in England, but doctrinal changes were now undertaken in right earnest. So these particular day or situations have become to implement and still scatter the influence of Roman Catholic Church because its origin is in the Rome that is very popular, especially to us Roman Catholic. And although Henry's Reformation was political in nature and only seemingly learned towards Protestantism, so his measures had at least opened the floodgates of Protestantism. So it is having the Somerset repelled and late King's treason and heresy laws and removed restrictions on printing press and publication of scriptures. So this give effect of the repeal of the heresy laws was the immediately felt. So preachers from European countries flocked into England. So Lutherans and Calvinists preached the Reformed doctrines freely in England. So Ridley, Latimer, and Hooper began preaching doctrinal reformation in England. And then the Protestant bias of Somerset along with the preachings of doctrinal reformation had their impact on the government. So Edward's first prayer book was an English translation from Old Latin service book. And it contained few traces of the teachings of the German reformers. So it is very common during this time of having this kind of reformers to have its improvements of their particular kingdoms in order to implement an efficient and productive way of leading a kingdom. So the uniformity in service was enforced by the first act of uniformity. So it should be also united. Each one of them should provide a unity and be conducted and adapt this kind of process in order for it to be effective and progressive. The influence of Northern Ireland on Edward VI was still very great, and when the young king's health was fast failing, Northern Ireland persuaded his royal master to change the course of succession by a will, and then settling the presence to Mary and Elizabeth, thereby secure Protestant succession to the throne. So the following information is very important, especially to us students who are taking up this criminology course, because it is knowing how the following kingdoms in the past era or past years implemented and how do the kings provide or contributed to their own kingdoms. It is very important to have this kind of knowledge in order for us to give and provide and get its idea how do they rule in a particular kingdom or country. So as I see, it is very effective to have this kind of studies or readings about history, because it is very applicable, especially nowadays, because it is still important and have its important use to each one of us as we live to this kind of society. So the information that I have mentioned were all the ideas that can promote and even refresh each one of us on how some of other countries have their implementations and the way they provide their people of kind of leadership. So it is very interesting to have this kind of studying process, because it could develop our self knowledge and ideas, and then it also provides us importance as being student. And then this kind of study process is very adaptable, especially during these days. So it has to be put into minds to us students in order for us to be effective during our class discussion when we come to a face-to-face classes and back to a normal way of living, just like what we are doing before this pandemic break down our different lives. And now, let us go back and take a recall of what we have discussed from my past videos, from the first video until this last video. So first, we have tackled the definition of institutional corrections and its role to our community. So it defined as the putting a person into jail for him to be rehabilitated and isolated from reoffending again into and making his community peace and in order. And also we have these different different institutions or sectors that could help to implement this correction system in our country. First is the Bureau of Corrections that provides every prisoners to have them rehabilitated and put considerations and exceptions to put them deterrence and incarceration in order for them to have themselves put to their minds to be regretted from their sins or crimes they have committed. And it is very important that existence of the Bureau of Corrections, especially to our kind country, because it is one way of helping our community, our society, and our country to have a peace and order community and protect the people and make them have a safe community to live. And also we also tackle another institution or sector that promotes and provides the safetyness of the people. This is what we call the BGMP, or the Bureau of Jail in Penology Management. It is very important to have this kind of institution because it provides and promotes to be isolated of some of the person who have been committing crimes in our community, and for them not to reoffend again, and they have to be given rehabilitation and some other resourceful activities in order to have its improvements to provide their personal needs even if they are inside the prison. And also we have discussed about the importance of this institutional correction and to the society and the question of is it effective to our country? And yes, it is effective to our country, but our government still faces its problems and lapses in implementing this corrections process because we have suffered overcrowding and lack of enough facilities and foods, especially in medical needs. Because of overcrowding, our prison in the Philippines become very dangerous to a particular person to be put into a jail or prison. But still, our government are having its development in collaboration from the different organizations and sectors and business sectors in order for this correction to be implemented well and be organized to help us or the community to have this peace and order community. And also the government is now having the budget of building new facilities for the to show the development of these corrections. And then we also have discussed the global view of prison administration. So means the globally discussion or thoughts about the prison administration from the different countries. We have to know this because we have to provide and observe some other countries on how do they implement this kind of correction system in order for us to maybe possibly adopt this kind of process in order for us to have the idea and maybe we could ask for help from them because now we have our agreement process in order for us to have this collaboration with some other countries. And it is also very important to have this kind of activity in order for our country to have this effectiveness and the governance of a particular government is effective to the people, and it is very applicable in each one of us, especially to us students taking a criminology course, to have the idea and knowledge about these kind of things. Because during or in having this kind of course, it needs to pass the board exams, and this particular subject is very or it has a big percent in during the board examination. That and also we have tackled of the sub of the prison type of prison during the past years, just like the Walnut Street Jail. This is one of example a jail that is having an effective way on implementing this correction system in their country. They have the idea of separating men and women, and especially separating inmates from one room to another room to prevent communication and in order for them to minimize physical contact or to pass any disease inside the prison. It is very important to emphasize the separation of this kind of process in order to have or show or to be resulted an effective way of knowing having this kind of process. And also, we have discovered the different person who have contributions, great contribution during this prison administration. And this is particularly to this person's contributions, especially to the influence of the Roman Catholic to the prison, and have this emphasizing the importance of human rights and the human dignity as we live in this society. So, as I end this video, I hope that you have learned and obtained knowledge and ideas that could help each one of us to develop our personal lives as we have lived into our community. And just like what Kuya Kim said, mag-aral ang mabuti upang ang buhay ay bumuti. That's all, and always keep safe and wear your mask. Thank you.
Faded in the city with my team.